Then we'll start our presentations.
We got David is up on full screen. I don't know who that is.
Alan's up on full screen.
Well, okay, here we go.
Here we go. We're good. Anyway, Nick is going to talk on gas, helium transportation. And just a brief, and everybody knows Nick, but I'll just give a brief introduction. Curator of the John W. Barringer III National Railroad Library, archivist for the Society. And Nick has written articles in historical societies. He has had an article in the RNLHS Railroad History. He edited a book of photographs on J.J. Young with Greg Smith. And he's done, people know him from the many presentations he's done at the B&O Historical Society's mini cons or conventions. So without any other additional information, why, I'll let Nick get started.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Nick Fry, and we were going to be in Akron, and Akron was the site of Goodyear Zeppelin. In fact, the air dock is one of 3 airship hangars in the United States that still stand, not blimp hangars, airships. And it's a subject that I've kind of been interested in because we did some really unusual things in the early days of flight. And with the United States, it involved helium. With other countries, it involved hydrogen. So this was going to be a nice in-person tie-in with what was going on in Akron. So first off, for those of you who have forgotten your high school chemistry, what is helium? It is the second element on the periodic table. It is the second most abundant element in the universe. 24% of all mass in the universe is helium. Now, most of that is in stars. It is unfortunately not very common on Earth. So if you have helium balloons or if you've been buying helium balloons for birthday parties, you've noticed the price has gone up over time because helium being lighter than air, it tends to leave this planet when it gets taken out of its storage container. On Earth, it's created by radioactive decay. In the rest of the universe, it's created by nuclear fusion, which is the most efficient way to make helium, but it also tends to be fairly destructive to the area around it. It was discovered in 1868. It's not a particularly old element. It was discovered using spectral analysis, where you look at the color spectrum created by various chemicals. They were looking at the sun and realized that there was a spectrum showing up that they weren't expecting, and they started investigating. They found it on Earth in 1881. They figured out how it was made in 1895. It is less dense than air, and it has many, many handy uses outside of balloons. In the United States, we have the world's largest supply of natural helium. It was found in 1903 on the Great Plains, first found in Kansas. The large helium field actually stretches across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And in 1903, it was kind of like, what the heck do we do with it? Because they were looking for petroleum products, which would burn. And they were getting a gas that would not burn. At first glance, that was extremely unhelpful. But then they realized there are other things we can do with this. It was helped along by the fact that World War I started. Ballooning had kind of started as a scientific and a recreational curiosity in the 18th century with the Montgolfier brothers in France. And it really wasn't until the Crimean War, and notably in the United States in the Civil War, that ballooning figured out, if I'm up really high, I can see what the other side is doing with their army, and I can draw a sketch. And as photography developed and cameras became lighter and more portable, and you didn't have to stand still for an extended period of time, they also came with the idea of giving these guys cameras to take up in the balloon with them and take pictures of what the other side was doing. And that really matured during the First World War. Both sides were using observation balloons. They were either going to be used as, they were tethered, so they were fixed, because you don't want your guy who's observing the enemy to get caught by an inconvenient gust of wind and wind up becoming a guest of the enemy for the rest of the war. Also with your camera, that now you got to get a new camera and you got to get a new guy and there's morale issues. So these were tethered in place, winched up and winched back, and they developed the film, or they'd be telegraphing by wire artillery bombardment results to the batteries that were miles behind the front lines. World War I was one of the first wars where you would have artillerists who were not firing line of sight. They were looking at map coordinates, and they were getting updates from forward observers, either in balloons or in prepared positions, to tell them, you really need to move that 300 yards forward from us because it's actually landing on us, guys, and it's very inconvenient. European balloons, for the most part, were using hydrogen. That had been the supply going back to the Civil War for lighter than air. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and it is also lighter than air, and it is far easier to produce than helium. The downside is it's rather flammable. We're not going to talk about the most famous example of that very much, but we'll see where it happened. The US started finding a market for helium. These balloons were targets of enemy aircraft of both sides, and if they were hydrogen and they caught fire, the trip down was a lot faster than if they just punched holes in it and it floated down to Earth on its own. So the US started exporting helium to the Allies for the most part. We were trading with both sides until about 1916, but the Allies were getting most of the trade. This is an example of the more simple balloon that was used throughout the war. Generally just a brown bag with a basket at the bottom, very much like a hot air balloon these days. And in fact, in the early days of the war, these were fairly common, and you could easily, if you were any kind of a pilot who could walk and chew gum and shoot the gun at the same time, you could get a balloon ace. And the early fighter pilots were balloon aces because these were easy pickings. And in fact, that started developing protect the balloons with your fighters to shoot down other fighters, and that kind of was what the early instances of aerial combat. They were trying to protect these guys in a balloon. When the war ends, we get reparations, one of which is Zeppelins. The Zeppelins during World War I were hydrogen-filled. They were entirely German. They proved that they were the only aircraft that had long range and long loitering time. They could stay up in the air much longer than a conventional aircraft. And the Germans used them for strategic bombing. London was bombed with Zeppelins. They were in terms of that aspect, they were attractive technology for a burgeoning aircraft industry that was still struggling to get really a practical long-range aircraft. And the Zeppelin looked like the potential that gave you a lot of capacity and a lot of range, which would make your airline theoretically financially viable, because you're competing with railroads. Railroads could go in any weather. They were reliable, and they had quite a bit of tonnage capacity. Airplanes did not have that at the time. The road system in the United States really doesn't start to get rebuilt with the unified system until after World War I. But even then, the amount of time to rebuild the entire road network in the United States is going to take years. And the Army, again, that's another aspect there. Eisenhower was involved with one of the first cross-country convoys, and it was a nightmare to drive from one coast to the other on U.S. roads. So the Zeppelin looked like a potential game changer. And as part of the reparations for World War I, the United States government got a Zeppelin. In our case, it was the Los Angeles, was built by the Zeppelin Company. And then on our own, we built the Shenandoah. These are both U.S. Navy operated vehicles. The Army stuck with observation balloons for the most part. The Navy was looking at this as reconnaissance for the fleet. There's no aircraft carriers right after World War I in the U.S. Navy. There are aircraft carriers in the Royal Navy. But again, range and time in the air are limiting factors. The Germans keep building Zeppelins after World War I, but they use hydrogen as their lifting gas. And in fact, the Zeppelin Company was working on negotiations with the U.S. to buy helium to replace hydrogen in the Hindenburg and the Graf Zeppelin in the 1930s when they had their accident in Lakehurst. So these are the first two Zeppelins of the United States. This is the Shenandoah, and this is the Los Angeles. The Los Angeles was built by the Zeppelin Company. The Shenandoah was built, the Los Angeles was built by the Zeppelin Company. Shenandoah was built in Lakehurst, New Jersey by the U.S. With Goodyear forming Goodyear Zeppelin as a joint venture to do this work. Why would Goodyear be the company you choose? Goodyear was the only company in the United States that had the capability and expertise to build the bags needed inside the Zeppelin to contain the helium gas. They also had the expertise to build the coating of the skin that went on the outside of these vehicles. So they were the prime contractor for the entire United States Navy dirigible program, the rigid airship program. So you've decided to build Zeppelins, and you're going to use helium as your source, and you have the world's largest natural supply of helium in the middle of the country, but the Navy is your customer, so they're not going to be working in the middle. They're going to be on the coast. So you've got to start looking at infrastructure for production and distribution of these resources. This is the gas field. It still exists to this day. It is still used to this day. Helium has many modern industrial uses outside of rockets. That supercooled helium is useful in certain high technology manufacturing processes, magnetism work, high energy physics needs helium. And those are just some of the major customers outside of the Macy's balloon industry and the party balloon industry. The first plants were developed during World War I. The suggestion actually came from the British, who were looking for ways for their barrage balloons to stop catching fire when the Germans shot at them. And they were the first customers until the U.S. Army started buying it when we were ramping up to participate in the war. The Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Mines basically administered this production field. Early on, this was pretty much all taken over by the U.S. government. And until the late 90s, it was a U.S. government managed operation. They have now since started to sell off the helium operations to private industry. And that is where we are today. It's still overseen. There's still oversight from the Bureau of Land Management, which is taken over from the Bureau of Mines. There is a pipeline that runs across these 3 states to help with distribution. But for the most part now, this is all private industry. These little spots are smaller helium fields. Generally, they're all around natural gas deposits or uranium deposits or thorium deposits. But generally, the big production center is still Amarillo up north. This is what a typical helium facility looked like in the heyday of the industry under government control. You had to purify the gas as it came out of the ground. You had a lot of impurities. You only wanted the helium. You did not want any of the other things like the petroleum gas. So they did have refining operations to extract the helium. And here is your rail yard, because most of this traffic moved by rail from the get-go once it left the pipeline. There is a major exception, which I found out much to my dismay for our Akron convention that I'll get to shortly. This is the Keys Helium Facility in Oklahoma. Oklahoma Historical Society, Kansas State Historical Society, the Library of Congress, and the National Archives. If you really do want to model this, and you want to, you're going to slum out here in the Midwest rather than the B&O territory and look at the flatlands, this is a great resource to model. This is Kansas State Historical Society. Great color shot from the Santa Fe collection they have, showing the Keys facility being switched. Again, a great resource. Also some nice detail of the helium cars. And this is the customer. This is the U.S. Navy at the time at Akron. This is, I believe, the USS Akron flying over Akron after having been built in Akron. And I think that's the most times I get to use Akron in a sentence for the whole presentation. Goodyear also started to realize, hey, there's marketing potential. They started looking at blimps, which were a hybridization of the balloon and the dirigible concept. Dirigibles required an extensive aluminum framing to support the structure, and that added weight, which reduced carrying capacity. As Goodyear developed better chemical processes to create rubberized fabric to contain the helium gas, they realized they could build smaller, cheaper, and in some cases just as effective blimps that didn't have the frame. So, but they still had the ability to control the aircraft. You would have an engine, and you had ailerons and rudders, very similar to an airplane, that allowed you to control your direction. Now, you're not going to go breakneck speed, but you could control your flight, which is a big advantage. This is one of the very first Goodyear blimps being used for advertising on top of O'Neill's department store in Akron. In the 1920s, Goodyear started realizing that there is enough of a market that they need to invest the infrastructure. Part of it was the Navy gave them a contract to build the dirigibles, and this is Goodyear Akron. This is the air dock facility that still stands to this day. Shortly after it was completed in 1929. This is a B&O excursion train. The B&O main line runs right by the air dock. I believe it's the line that goes to Canton from Akron, and it goes right through the Goodyear property. And that is the main for this branch line, and that is air dock. They are that close. And it was a very frustrating thing to learn that Goodyear did not ship helium on the B&O after 1932. Now, the initial facility that Goodyear built during World War I was at Wingfoot Lake, which is now a recreational lake, but originally it was used for balloon training and construction. You had to teach these guys in the Army who were using balloons for observation purposes how to maintain the balloon. How do you operate the balloon? It is fundamentally going up and going down, but if there's a hole in it, how do you fix it? How do you fix it effectively? What do you use? So that was the initial use of Wingfoot Lake. Wingfoot Lake stays as a balloon facility into the Second World War and afterwards, and mainly as a training ground and production. But this is probably the best these hangars will look in any picture in the presentation. This is not too long after World War I ended. You can see it's starting to get a little worn down. This is in the 20s and 30s. This is 1929. And you can see the roof's getting a little beat up. They're now basing the Goodyear blimp out of there. One of the hangars is gone. They've already really started looking at moving to the facility closer to downtown Akron for more operations. This is the construction of the air dock in Akron. It is one of the largest freestanding structures in the world without internal supports. I think that's the gimmick they use to get their largest adjective. This is with 3 of the Goodyear blimps, company shot to promote the construction of the facility. And again, here is the B&O main right there. And there's the tracks that were being used to deliver construction supplies. These railroad tracks are going to, in some cases, stay in not for any delivery of material, but because the frames to hold up the mooring masts are going to be mounted on rails to physically bring the dirigibles in and out of this facility. Both this facility and the facility that's going to be built in Moffett Field in Sunnyvale, California, or Mountain View, California, they're both going to have these railroad tracks built in for the mooring masts. A little closer, they've now put the skin on and they have the skylights. One problem that has happened with the facility in California, this skin is all full of PCBs and it actually has had to be taken off. Fortunately, there's a small concern in Mountain View named Google that 2 guys happen to have founded. They had some change available, spare, and they are paying to refurbish the facility and put a new skin on it, and they will be renting it. I think they negotiated a fairly modest rent of like $6 billion for 60 years of use from the U.S. government. So it's nice to see a small business helping out like that. This is where the facility was finished, an aerial shot. This is Goodyear Tire and Rubber Manufacturing. Here is Air Dock, and here are the suburbs of Akron. Very large building just rising up out of the flat land around the city. This is a shot in World War II era. This is from the Library of Congress. This was painted black rather than silver, which kind of, I'm not sure if that was, it always seems to be been painted black from the get-go. So it was not a wartime, let's hide this facility from any spies. How do you hide a big building like that? Boeing went and put an entire town on top of their plant in Washington, but this has just always been black and in Akron. And you can see one of the blimp mooring masts. Dirigible use has ended at this point in World War II, but they're still building blimps for the Navy here. And in fact, here are some of those blimps being built. This is a World War II era image from inside Air Dock. So one of the coolest aspects in researching this, and if you're a Marvel fan or your kids have made you watch these movies, one of the coolest things that Marvel ever did is they came up with the idea of a flying aircraft carrier. So what if I told you we once really had flying aircraft carriers? And noted B&O content, Georgetown is right here. So Georgetown branch fans take note. And that's what the Navy wanted. They wanted a flying aircraft carrier. They pitched the idea. the Shenandoah had crashed because of well, they hadn't crashed yet, but the Shenandoah and the Los Angeles had shown that there was a potential to use these vehicles for reconnaissance, and airplanes were getting better. So what if you merged the two and created a flying aircraft carrier that allowed you to send multiple aircraft out from an aircraft that itself was further out, and really increase the scouting range for your battle force? Got to remember, the 1920s and 1930s, this is still a battleship navy. The battleship guys are calling the shots, and the idea is to make battleships the most effective gunnery platforms in the world. And you do that by being able to get ready for your enemy to show up in gun range before you're in the enemy's gun range. And that is scouting. And that's what the airship was going to be used for by the Navy. And the aircraft carrier, initially, the Navy was like, oh, that's pleasant, we can use that for scouting. And it's not really until the British raid on Taranto Harbor in Italy and the Japanese raid on Pearl Harbor that the battleship domination of the Navy is really taken down, and the carrier becomes today the premier naval system. So this is the first frame of the Akron being built in the air dock in Ohio. It's all aluminum. It's designed to be light, so they've engineered the truss members to have as much space as possible, because you're going to carry a crew, you're going to carry gasoline for the aircraft and for the dirigible itself. You're going to need to carry supplies. This has got to have legs and duration. That's the entire reason for the program. And so you got to make it as light as possible. So there's a lot of metallurgical development using aluminum. They used a lot of aluminum at the time for these vehicles. And also structural engineering to create strong structural members that are as light as possible. A friend of mine once said, engineering isn't knowing where to put the piece to make something work. Engineering is knowing what you can leave out to make it safe and work in a stable structure. Here's Akron, a little further along construction. They're still building framework. You see a lot of cables helping to hold up the frame, a lot of cribbing to hold up the frame of the dirigible, but they are putting the skin on. And here she is finished in a composed photo over Akron, Ohio. Most of these shots are all from the Summit Memory website, which is Summit County, Ohio's historical website. It's a really great resource for a lot of Akron images. Now, the concept of using the aircraft carrier in the sky, you had to develop how are you going to handle aircraft. Now, the Navy had Curtiss F-9C Sparrowhawk fighters. That was what they chose because that's what they had for the rest of the Navy. They did not opt for a longer range, small buy production run aircraft. This was done on a more limited budget than they would have liked, so they had to make do. There is film of this online on YouTube. I had tried to put it into here, but it just wasn't working out real well. So I just, you can find it on YouTube by your own. But this is the concept. You have a hangar door cut into the bottom of the dirigible. Your aircraft is modified with a hook up top and a bar to help guide that hook in. The vehicle, the dirigible, has a winch system that will lift the aircraft into the hangar and lower it out of the hangar for launching. There's also an armature built into the hook system that can be controlled by the pilot to release the hook and allow the aircraft to fly free. They would carry 5 Sparrowhawks in the Akron class dirigibles. And they were either designed to have wheels, or the wheels could be taken off and replaced with an external fuel tank that would allow for increased range. It was not a drop tank. You had to carry the fuel tank with you all the time, but it did give you some longer legs for your scouting missions, essentially. This is what the inside of the Akron's hangar looked like. This, you may have noticed this piece on the crane. When the pilot had hooked on, this would lower to help stabilize and secure the aircraft. Then it would be winched back into the hangar. The plane would leave the hangar with its engine stopped, and they would start start the engine after they had left. And then once they had gotten to an appropriate number of revolutions, the pilot would signal by hand that he was ready to go, and he would release. It was the pilot's final decision. If he did not feel that his aircraft was safe to drop, wave it off, bring it back into the aircraft, fix what they needed to fix, or put a new aircraft out. These tracks up here would hook onto the aircraft frame, the hook frame here, and you would track out to 5 holding places inside the Akron as your hangar. There's a really great National Geographic from about 30 years ago where they found the wreck of the Macon, which was a sister ship, and a nice diagram that folks at National Geographic had put out that showed the internal arrangement of the hangar system. Which that was actually where I caught the bug. My grandfather subscribed to National Geographic. They had it, and I think I wound up taking that issue home after a while because it was really neat to me. And the Navy being the Navy, you got to have a patch or a logo. This was what the squadrons attached to the Macon and the Akron had on the side of their aircraft, and patches on the side of their uniforms. The flying trapeze, that was the motif, and that was very appropriate. There were trapeze bars, essentially is what the pilots called them. There was the main bar that was the hook, or the main bar that got you in and out of the aircraft. Both dirigibles had a fixed bar further aft that if you wanted to hang out, literally, and save some gas, or you needed to wait before the hangar was available, you could hook onto that. And you couldn't get into the aircraft that way, but it was a way you could turn the engine off and wait and save fuel, or wait for the rest of your squadron to get deployed and then head on out into a mission. Now, the Navy, once they took delivery of both of these aircraft carriers, they had 2 operating bases. We only had 2 fleets. They weren't numbered. You had the Atlantic Fleet and the Pacific Fleet. And the Atlantic Fleet was based, their airship operations were all based out of Lakehurst. This is a well past World War II image of when the Navy was still in the blimp business, but it was on its last legs. Blimps were now being used for radar picket duty at this point in the 50s, or anti-submarine patrols. And the enemy was now the Soviet Union as opposed to the Germans. So this building was originally built where the Shenandoah had been built. The Los Angeles was built in Germany, but the Shenandoah was built in Lakehurst in the hangar, and that was where they were based out of. And this was where Akron was based out of for its operational lifetime. Lakehurst is now part of the Fort Dix McGuire Air Force Base complex. It is a satellite operation. This building still stands. The most famous event to happen at Lakehurst, unfortunately, was the crash of the Hindenburg. That is memorialized on site. One current use of the building, it has been the site of model aircraft design competitions. It gives a nice wind protected space that you can test out your small aircraft designs in safety. This is Moffett Field, Sunnyvale, California, now part of Ames Research Center and NASA. This particular site is technically still Moffett Federal Airfield. It's named after Admiral Moffett, who unfortunately died in the crash of one of these dirigibles. This building also still stands, but the skin has been taken off. It was purpose-built solely for operation of Akron-class dirigibles. And here you see the mobile mooring mast on the railroad tracks. It's visible by satellite, and if you happen to have a federal access card or business at Ames, you can actually visit the site once they reopen with the whole COVID thing. But I also recommend visiting Ames because of all the NASA facilities I've ever been to. It had the best cafeteria of all of them. The Navy was prompt to start promoting Akron and Macon's capabilities. And there's nothing more important if you're in the U.S. Navy than making sure that Congress knows that you have things that they paid for, and you would like to have more things that they will vote to pay for. This is the Akron over Washington, D.C. This is a pre-World War II but post-World War I shot. There's no Smithsonian buildings other than the castle built, and there's a lot of temporary buildings built during World War I that are still standing along the mall. And there's no Pentagon yet. And this is the Memorial Bridge, the Lincoln Memorial. This would now be very expensive real estate these days. This is the inside of the hangar at Lakehurst, which was quite large. This was built for construction of Shenandoah and housing Shenandoah and Los Angeles simultaneously. So you really kind of have to go to one of these hangars and appreciate just how big these things are. And it's also amazing that they have not been torn down because climate control costs are significant. Another shot, really good detail of the mobile mooring mast, which was self-propelled. There's the diesel engine that would help operate that. This is, I believe, Macon in flight with her Sparrowhawks. Looks like they are doing formation flight, but they are configured for aircraft recovery operations now. This is the control cab. This is an auxiliary control cab and observation platform. Nice advantage about having an airship this big is you could use radio in here. And in fact, they had a radio aerial antenna for wireless. The disadvantage, you've only got the pilot and the radios aren't small enough really to be effective. So they would see things and have to fly back to report what they had seen. And then the airship would report that back. This is the Akron on what they call a fleet problem. Now there's about 7 million cubic feet of helium and involved in this and operation. And these were not insubstantial investments. So these fleet problems were designed to show the supposed usefulness of the Akron and the Macon in helping the battle force fight an enemy. And to do that, they needed support ships. This is a dirigible support ship attached to the Navy's battle force. It would provide operational support supplies to the airship and help coordinate with the battle force. Unfortunately, in every fleet problem that both of these vehicles were involved with, they were supposedly shot down by the according to the umpires. So it started looking like their usefulness may have been limited. And in fact, the Navy winds up losing both of these vehicles. They flew both in storms. Every airship the U.S. Navy lost, it was because it was flown in a storm. They really wanted to push the envelope of all-weather capability, I think, and show that it could operate in bad weather. And no, you can't. In other cases, they had poor weather predicting capabilities, didn't see the storm. These things are not exactly the fastest vehicles in the world, so they could not outrun a storm front. Shenandoah was lost to a squall line. Both Macon and Akron were lost. 2 storms off the coast. And while the dirigible concept failed, the blimp idea still was attractive, although they never really got the prominence in Navy theory that they had in the past. The Navy needed anti-submarine potential for World War II. Goodyear again got the contract because of their experience. They'd shown that blimps could work. Blimp technology had gotten better, engine technology had gotten better. And if you're going to hunt submarines off the coast of the United States, you want to be able to hang out over the ocean for a long period of time. And if you can drop depth charges on the other fella, so much the better. And that's what the K-class blimps did. These were the workhorses of World War II. The M-class was a later development. The Navy tried to keep the airship program going on into the 50s and 60s. In this case, they were looking at radar pickets to protect against Soviet attack from long-range aircraft. And before the DEW line and radar technology got better, we were doing things like putting radar on blimps and they would loiter over the coast. Or we had these things called Texas towers, which were small, triangular, almost look like oil platforms off the coast of the US. And their entire purpose was to have radar and to provide early warning. And blimp acquisition gradually decreased. These were the N class was the last blimp built, and it was purposely designed to carry radar. And that was really the last time the Navy operated blimps. Now, we were going to be in Akron, and I was all set to talk about balloons and helium traffic over the B&O. And I looked and looked and looked and looked for traffic numbers for Goodyear by rail. And I'm thinking, I got pictures that show a B&O line literally feet from the air dock. I'm like, this is perfect. I'm going to find the numbers, and it's going to be great. I wasn't finding any of the information. I was starting to get very alarmed. And I'm using the university's resources, all the interlibrary loan, WorldCat, and I find an article from the Railroad Trainman in the 1930s. And there's a guy in it talking about the competition the railroads were facing from trucks. And as I read it, the light bulb went off in my head. It's 1932, and this gentleman reports that Goodyear had switched to shipping helium from Kansas to Akron by truck. The Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company was going to start subsidizing the trucking industry by having its helium shipped by truck. And that is why I was having trouble finding records of rail helium shipments to Goodyear. It was going by truck. This is a map that I took there's a great article in the fourth quarter of 2014 in the War Bonnet on helium traffic on the Santa Fe. And they used a map from the US government. This is the production and distribution of helium in the United States. And the customers. And the Santa Fe magazine map has a very helpful list of routing because they have access to the Santa Fe records to the Kansas State Historical Society. And the B&O was only involved with traffic to one facility during World War II. and it was the South Weymouth Air Blimp facility for the Navy. We were a bridge between the Santa Fe and the New Haven to get helium to that facility for the blimps. That was not very regular traffic because helium was expensive. It was expensive even in the 20s. And you know, the Akron and the Macon had a 7 million cubic foot capacity. So investment in the flying aircraft carriers was a significant chunk of money, and you did not want to lose that helium. The same thing with the blimps. You didn't want to deflate the blimp if you didn't have to. So traffic was not very heavy, but it was there. These green points are blimp or airship operations. The blue points were the major refinery facilities for helium in the middle of the country. And so you've got mostly naval air stations. A Goodyear Air Dock is in Akron. I have that there, even though it was not a rail customer, because it was a helium customer of the facilities in the middle of the country. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration wound up being a good, reliable customer of helium after World War II ended and the blimp program ended, because helium is an important component in rocket engine operation. It's a gas that does not burn, but it allows you to provide pressure to a fuel system to help push the propellants into the system so they will ignite. We used it, we still use it on all US built rockets. It was a component of the moon lander. The SpaceX Falcon series is now probably the biggest consumer of helium right now. They still get their shipments by rail. The Atomic Energy Commission used helium. Department of Energy now still uses helium. And the Air Force was using helium because they had their own independent rocket program, basically based out of Southern California at Edwards Air Force Base and the Missile Test Center in Rich, which is very close to Edwards. And Vandenberg still has a helium consumption because they do rocket launches out of there. The NASA facilities are Langley Research Center, which was doing propulsion development, Kennedy, which still does launches. Stennis is a engine testing facility in Mississippi. And then Rocketdyne, which is now decommissioned, was in Santa Susana. That had an Air Force and NASA contract to build rockets there. It is today a Superfund site because of the various toxic chemicals used in rocket propulsion. The origin railroads, if you are going to model, and you're a Rock Island or a Santa Fe guy, you've got a plethora of material. And Jeff Ford has a great page on Flickr that has where he's collected photographs from the Bureau of Mines, the Bureau of Land Management, National Archives, railroads. This is the Amarillo plant being switched by a Rock Island steam switcher. They were the two point of origin railroads. Now, the early helium cars were built mainly in the late teens, early 20s, into the 20s. Tank design was new. Pressurized gas being transported by rail in large quantities was still kind of a new concept. And the engineering was basically build big, heavy, almost boiler-type containers to transport these items, this gas, safely. And these were heavy cars, and you do what you can with what you've got. There's not a lot of framing. It's basically a tank car frame with these three large tanks on top. And this was built by Bethlehem Steel. Original customer was the Army Air Service, so these were being built for the balloons, and the Navy takes over lighter than air operations. So this was going to Lakehurst to help with the airships there. Again, you're not buying a lot of helium all the time because it's expensive and you don't want to waste it. You do have leakage. You do sometimes have an emergency operation where you need to release helium so the airship will settle. So you do have to have a supply of helium on hand at the bases. And that's what these cars were doing. They were transporting that helium from the fields in the Midwest to the facilities. I found this as a Google search. It's a nice, crisp shot of cars. And now I wish I had a chance to buy it when it was available for 28 bucks. But it's a really good end-on view of these cars. Now, these are already, not young, not new, in the 20s. And you would think that these cars are not going to last into the post-World War II era. In fact, they do. They just get changed to carrying other things. I mentioned NASA was one of the customers of helium. This is, if you're in Ohio, there's a facility that's not particularly well known, but it was part of the NASA Lewis, and now it's called NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland by the airport, that was called Plumbrook. And Plumbrook was spending a lot of time doing nuclear power testing. And they also have the space environment testing chamber out at Plumbrook, where you can put a whole spaceship in a chamber and evacuate the air and simulate the thermal environments of space. Or you can change the composition of the chamber and use it to simulate Mars. They actually tested Mars landing options inside this chamber. They could manipulate temperature and air pressure and atmosphere composition in there. And they were still using the 19-teens, 20s vintage cars to carry not helium anymore, but other gases for Lewis. And you can see they've taken the end caps off, and you just see how just bloody great, big, heavy designs these tanks were. This is from a a Glenn history site on the Plumbrook facility. Now, after World War II, they improved the design of helium, partially because they all of a sudden had, World War II, they started building cars. Post-World War II, they rebuilt the cars and built more cars, because not only did you have the dirigible operations, you had Air Force customers, aerospace company customers, and NASA was buying helium. They needed more cars than what they had in stock. They weren't just serving the Navy anymore. So this is an American Car and Foundry builder's photo of a Department of the Interior car. This is from the Berger collection. This is September 57 build date. Some neat things I want to point out about the car. 230,000 pound weight empty. This is a heavy car. So that's something that your road crew is going to need to be aware of, or they're going to wind up replacing a bunch of knuckles on the couplers. Other interesting thing, how are they getting the helium in and out of these tanks? The doors open up. Now, there are a handful. Tyco made a really cheapo plastic version of this car in HO that a lot of people wind up using because it's available, and they really do a good job detailing it. And that's another component of the article that the Santa Fe group put out of how you could have these cars on your railroad. And generally, most people say start with the Tyco model because it's cheap, and if you screw up, you're not losing a resin car out of this. But these are shots. If you need them, they're on Flickr for the Berger page. But it shows that this was the end of the car was the business end of the car. How you got access to the tanks. This is another from Jeff Ford's site. This is a Bureau of Mines photo showing the repair shop at Keys. They had their own plant switchers, and they had their own, since these were government cars, they were repaired at government facilities. So generally, the helium facilities had their own repair shops. So if you have to have a bad order, it's going back to Amarillo or Kansas or to Oklahoma for repair. If you do want to model NASA, they did have their own helium operations. If you look at how many cars this one switcher's pulling, that's impressive. It does help that Florida is fairly flat. But this is the amount of helium NASA's using in the shuttle era. Not an insubstantial amount being moved back and forth. This is from the NASA Railroad History handout, but that's freely available online. The NASA Railroad has its own kind of niche fandom to this day, and if you do want to model that, certainly there's plenty of resources available. And for a period of time, I believe Athearn made a version of this of the switchers at Kennedy in HO scale. Now, the helium cars, they basically stopped building them in the late 50s, and they haven't really built any new cars since then. But generally, freight cars have a 40-year operational life. So what do you do when a helium car hits its 40-year end of operational life and you still want to use it? You take it off the trucks, so it's not technically a freight car anymore, and you put it on an 89 Ford heavy-duty flat car. And hey, look, you got a helium car again. Not only that, you've got a helium car with twice the capacity of the old design. That's what they're doing today. They're using 1950s vintage helium cars in service because the tanks are still good. The valves are still good. They just can't run on railroads on their own trucks anymore, so you put them on a car that can run on railroads. This is actually, this is SpaceX's helium car operation at Florida, and there they are. These are 1950s cars on an 89-foot heavy-duty flat. And that is pretty much the end. Routing, if anybody's curious, it's predominantly on the southern railroads to get from the helium facilities to Kennedy now. There's not a whole lot of customers up north that use rail-delivered helium. And so, unfortunately, there's not much call if you're modeling Chessie and CSX to have a helium, a significant helium traffic. There are preserved cars. Amarillo Railroad Museum has a helium car, and they have a great resource webpage. Jeff Ford's Flickr album is fantastic. Jay Miller, who wrote Passing Gas, it was an adaptation of his presentation for the Santa Fe Historical Society. It's the Q4 2014 issue that is available from the ATSF Historical Society. KSC's fact sheet for the NASA Railroad. The Naval Historical Center has a lot of material on the airships if you're really interested in those. And the Macon, at least, their wreck, the wreck of that vessel is a NOAA Marine Sanctuary. And NOAA has a very nice page on the history of the Macon that has some great imagery and the history of the wreck. And also, if you find the National Geographic article, I highly recommend it. So that is it.
You have some questions in the chat, Nick. I don't know if you can read them.
I couldn't while I was doing the sharing, but we can take a look at that.
First one is Patty Smith notes that we have pictures of those cars at Plumbrook.
Yes, yes, and Plumbrook being the nuclear energy facility, they used helium in that process. I see Jerry Elder had a question. Tillamook, that is a blimp hangar. So, I believe the Tillamook hangars may still stand.
Yeah, Patty Smith says a museum now.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, the Sparrowhawks at the Air and Space Museum. And I don't know if there's one at the Navy Aviation Museum in Pensacola. But yeah, that was really cool. Let's see.
Oh, further up at 1248, Patty, did the B&O bring in materials to Goodyear for the construction of the blimps and aircraft?
Yeah, they would have been the railroad of choice to get to the air dock. But it's aluminum for the most part. And most of that, they were definitely bringing in material for the construction of the air dock. But anything that Goodyear didn't truck in would have probably come over the B&O. Unfortunately, I really need those records from the 30s, but that kind of day-to-day stuff, unfortunately, in most cases, has not survived.
Paul Barnes noted that the picture of the dirigible over Akron was a Los Angeles ZR-3.
That's right, yes.
Okay.
And yes, the Germans were much better at flying Zeppelins in bad weather. Generally don't fly Zeppelins in bad weather. You would think after we lost the first one, we'd have maybe we shouldn't do that. But no, we had to lose 3. Yes, Chuck, those trucks were definitely Goodyear tires. I would say, and Paul had a question about NASA also used helium in the space shuttle program. Would it be safe to say the loaded helium cars were lighter than their empty weight? Yes, but probably not at a point that the scale would notice. But Doug points out that yes, physics dictates a loaded car is heavier. Also, it would have been compressed gas too.
I was going to say, I would think it'd be heavier because once you compress the gas,
Yeah,
you increase the mass.
density.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I forgot to mention, helium is still used in deep sea diving, but not in huge quantities. So there is helium. There is some helium customers. Are some helium customers in areas that service the petroleum industry. Since that's where most saturation diving is still done, generally along the oil production facilities in the Gulf of Mexico. You do see it a lot more in Europe because the wellheads are much deeper, but it's not nearly the volume that the rocket industry uses or aerospace industry uses. Jaron had a question about delivered for Lakehurst. I was looking at the Santa Fe's article on the routing, and they have it Santa Fe to Pensy to get to Lakehurst. And I was not sure about that because CNJ has a line that goes to Lakehurst too. So I'm probably going to have to look at abandoned railroads to see if they both served the Lakehurst facility. Let's see. Patty asked if I've been to the hangars in California. I have been to Ames. I used to have a cool job at the NASA Center for Aerospace Information. I actually got to go to Ames. We went as close to the hangar as we were allowed because it's on an active airfield. You could go up to the fence, but if you wanted to go into the hangar, you had to have an escort. And there is a museum there that does tours on specified times when the airfield is not in use. And I think I was there at the center not too long before they took the skin off the hangar because of PCB contamination. They are going to keep the hangar in California, which is great. It's a cool building, and I'm glad to see it preserved. Okay, Barry. Yes, Barry Kenner in a private message mentioned that Lakehurst Naval Air Station had a school for aviation boatswain's mates and a mock-up of the forward section of the flight deck of an aircraft carrier used to teach students on how to move aircraft around. Yes, that is one of the ways they reutilize that hangar space. They put an aircraft carrier flight deck's markings on there and taught people how to move aircraft around an aircraft carrier deck properly and safely. Technically right now, Chuck, it rains every day. It rains in the hangar at Moffett because there's no skin on it. So it is supposed to be reskinned by 2024. Okay. I don't see any more questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate the presentation by Nick. That was really a great presentation. And I want to thank all the presenters, Wade Rice, David Leiter, and Nick Fry for their all three, I think, extremely good presentations. And I want to thank Nick and Al for all the work they did on Zoom, and Al on his email, setting up an email for the society, and which is to remind all members that it's important to keep your email up to date, because the society will continue using the email notification. And the unfortunate thing is that for a number of our members, we don't have a good email to send them a electronic notification. So over the year, I think we're going to work at notifying members to notify the members to start their to provide us with a good email. So with that and the presentations, I will now go to Greg Smith. I assume Greg is ready for the business meeting, which is essential to society. We have to hold annual business meeting. One of the reasons we postponed the convention was to be able to send out written notices for the business meeting, which for those members who don't have email, and to comply with the legality of our bylaws. So if Greg is ready, I'm ready to hand it over to him.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. There isn't a lot to talk about because of the COVID-19 thing. There has been some improvements and some changes. So I'll talk about the state of the society first. Financially, we're healthy. Membership is still declining a little bit, but we've in the last 6 months, we picked up 10 more people, new members than we normally would in this time frame. So that's a positive. We still have to do a lot to promote society, but we're in better shape than most, financially and membership wise. And we're doing pretty good with our sales and promotion of the society. So let's start from the beginning. Financial wise, Chris has given me some bullet points instead of posting a full financial statement. Our membership income is 53.6K or 50,000. It's down slightly from last year. Like we said, the membership's gone down a little bit. What's happening is some of our long-term members have either dropped out because they are not capable anymore to participate in the society, or they have passed away. And we're not getting as many younger people in the society, and that's an issue that we're going to have to address over the next year. The store income was way over what we consider budget, but that was because of the great effort of Ray Lichty with the paper plate project. And then the Baltimore book was so successful that we had to print another 300 copies. And right now we're down to about 60 left. So if you haven't gotten the B&O in Baltimore book, there's still some available. So that's moving along pretty good. We don't expect to have as good as year this year because many things have not developed. Our research is behind because guys can't get access to resources that we should. We have 2 books in the works, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. Donations, thank you for everyone who's made donations to the various societies' funds. The mortgage fund is about $8,000 short of reaching our goal. We will pay that off in April. We have some reserve money if we don't meet the donations that we can cover, I think, the rest of that with no problem. So we're doing pretty good there. And overall, our expenses this year were down because we were basically shut down for 5 months. We did turn the heat off when we closed the building down in March. The electricity only got used 1 day a week while Grant Berry and I were in here doing some work. And it was moving along pretty well, but we didn't reopen until the middle of July because we want to make sure that our membership was safe. We're doing everything we can to protect people as they work in the building here. So overall, the revenue was over $13,000 on the plus side. We would like to do that again, but we're not going to be there anywhere close to that because we don't have anything we produce right now to make that kind of revenues. So again, financially, we're doing very well, and I hope we can continue to do that. Once the mortgage is paid off, then we can start looking at long-term investments to make sure the society continues. Membership, as I mentioned, right now we have 4 farm regulars, 2 sustaining members, 4 institutional, 53 life, 593 US regular, 470 sustaining, and we do 9 exchange with other organizations. So we're at 1135. So that's what our current membership is. And like everybody else, there's a slight trend down. There isn't a historical society or museum in the country right now that's not seeing the downturn in membership. Part of it has to do, people don't have jobs, so they're not spending money right at the moment. I have been in touch with the B&O Museum. They reopened up about the end of May, early June. They have a light turnout right now. They're in the process of getting back none of the board of trustees have met for the last 8 months. They're just getting back to looking at the projects and objects that they were going to talk about, like expanding and redoing their archives and getting ready for the bicentennial. Our director, Tom Dupuy, has informed us that the B&O executive train the CSX executive train has been painted up in the original B&O paint scheme. They also acquired a B&O dome car. So I'm interested to see what that is. And they're going to paint 2 locomotives, but they won't disclose what paint scheme they're going to do for the bicentennial. So look forward to that. They're also working, CSX is working with the museum for a celebration in 2027. And they're looking at getting other railroads involved into the celebration like they did in 1927. So that's a positive sign there. So that we're moving right along. Sales items, like I said, we don't have a new book this year. I was hoping to have the dining car book, but Joe Nevin wasn't coming in for 4 or 5 months. Other outside resources that he could have used weren't open. So I'm hoping that we will have the dining car book in your hands or able for sale by early 2021. The second book that we have in the works is Ed Young, one of our past direct members, the archives volunteer that is, and editor, was working on a book on the St. Louis division. He's going to cover the history from the Ohio, Mississippi up until the years of Chessie, and had a bunch of research, but he hadn't completed it, had some draft work. Mostly outlines for each chapter. So Nick Fry has volunteered to get this going again. He's met with Frank Dewey, who is the editor of the Rainbow magazine and a society member. Frank grew up in Washington, Indiana, and has helped Nick meet some people that used to work for the railroad. And again, Nick hasn't been able to do much research for the last 6 months because everything's closed down. So we're hoping Nick will have something ready for us by the end of 2021, and the book will be ready for sale in 2022. And then there's a couple other projects that we're looking at that hopefully we can do in the future. Currently, we have the B&OCT book, which we talked about earlier. It's a very good book. I've only scanned through it because I have a stack of books. You can only read so many at a time. And then we have the D14 Bethlehem Car Works HO scale kit, very nicely done resin kit, which was the 3D printed the sides and then they made resin molds off of it. John Green has done that. After this batch is sold out, we will expect to get a different version of the D14 and then some other cars. Hopefully the Lord doesn't take John too early so we can get these done. Otherwise, there isn't much in the, if you notice from the hobby industry, there isn't much because nobody's really moved along because of production and the imports restrictions and the trade war with China and such, that it's very limited. We are looking at a project with Tangent Models. We're not sure it's viable yet, but you should know after the first of the year. The other thing is that for those who are modelers, both Athearn and Tangent are redoing their B&O cabooses that they announced this year or released this year. They're doing different numbers, so if you want those, you'll have to get those through your hobby shop. I'm just giving you a heads up. Archives-wise, when we were closed down for those 4 or 5 months, we had gotten donated to us some jewelry cases that weren't really, they were free and they were good solid jewelry cases, but they weren't really adaptable for what we wanted to do for exhibits in the hallway. So Grant and I went and modified all those jewelry cases while we were here by ourselves with nobody in the building, and they're now finished and we're going to start displaying stuff that we have in the vault room. We're going to try and make it educational so if somebody comes to visit, they can look at it and go from there. The other big acquisition, which I forgot to tell the directors last night, we have acquired the dispatcher panel for the Chicago division that was in Akron, Ohio. It got to us through a very unique way. An electrician, local power, who happened to be a rail fan and used to visit that office, asked the company that was going to renovate the building, what are you going to do with that? He says, well, it's going to go in the dumpster. And he says, well, how much would it cost? So he bought the dispatcher panel components. It's 8 components that bolt together and all. And brought it home and put it in his living room for a number of years. And finally he realized, I got to have my living room back. So he contacted some of the guys from the Society in Ohio, and Grant Berry and I drove out. We rented a truck and we brought back the dispatcher's panel, and it now sits in the auditorium with a future for it to be determined what we're going to do with it. It's a very interesting piece. It shows all the interchange points and all the sidings and everything else. So it's a nice piece of history sitting there on the floor.
Yeah, that was Mike Lytle and Bill Kramer and Ron Spiga, I think.
Okay, thank you, Andy. All right. One of the things we did acquire, it was when we got Ralph Barger's books and all his Pullman car collection. Ralph's daughter didn't know what to do with all his slides and color prints. And unfortunately, there wasn't much B&O. Ralph didn't start photographing railroads until he got out of the military. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and that wasn't until the 70s. Ralph's brother was a big Western United States fan, UP, Santa Fe, that kind of thing. So they would go weeks-long trips almost every summer out west. Well, Ralph had a large portion of UP, Santa Fe, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, Burlington Northern, and a lot of West Coast railroads. And we tried to do slide nights here, but we didn't get the public interest. So now we sorted through all those slides and all the color prints and all the black and white prints that Ralph had collected by railroad historical societies, and are contacted them, and we are dispersing the collection to those societies with the conditions that it's noted as courtesy of the B&O Railroad Historical Society and the Barker family. We're going to seriously in the future strongly consider whatever donations we take because of the space it takes up and also the time it consumes when we could be working on something else. So with that, we did luck out with the Anthracite Society. When I sent them the notice that we had some slides for them, they also said, well, that's lucky because we got 62 B&O slides. We want to say, just give us address. So we're just going to exchange stuff back and forth. The other historical societies, the only requirement I ask for them is they pay for the shipping. And everybody's agreed so far. So that's moving along there. We should have all this settled up in a couple months, and then we can move on to other things. The other interesting thing that happened about 2 weeks ago, one of our volunteers, Kathy Zimmerman, who also works at the Baltimore Museum of Industry as a volunteer, contacted me and says, we're going through the warehouse down here. We're getting rid of some stuff. We have all the construction drawings and erection drawings for the fruit pier at Locust Point. Do you want them? Of course, I said yes. So between the drawings and the photographs that we have from the engineering files, we could pretty much build the whole thing by ourselves. But it's a nice piece of history that we have in here. One big collection that came in during the COVID break was a local photographer out of Bel Air, Maryland. And a buddy of his, he asked a buddy of his to bring down this large collection of 8x10 black and white photographs. His name was Bill Retberg. And if you're a fan of Combat publications, his photographs showed up in a number of Combat magazines and books. There are phenomenal quality photographs, but he's taken photographs from 1960s to the early Chessie era. We are looking at this. There is enough stuff to do another Baltimore book. There's enough materials to do a Pittsburgh Division book, a book on the West End of the Cumberland Division, and some stuff from Ohio. It's phenomenal. So we have 8 notebooks. Each notebook has about 140 photographs in it. Total was just under 900 photographs. We're going to look at this to do future publications. Again, if somebody wants to come into the archives and help us work on this and get this done. We haven't even gone through Rodney Peterson's color slide material. Rodney started out in Pittsburgh, so there's probably stuff to help us with the Pittsburgh Division book. And then he came to Baltimore in the 60s, and he has a large number of color photographs of Baltimore. So between those 2 collections, we probably could do some number of good publications. So we're considering that. And then we're looking at a project for the bicentennial, but that's just in the discussion stage. So that's basically what's going on at the archives here. We average between 8 and 12 members. We have a couple of members because of health issues have not been coming. I can respect them. They have their not going to take a chance of getting a virus that may kill them. So I respect them for that. We sanitize the place after we get done. We're trying to keep it very restrictive. We don't let the public in. If you're a member and you want to come and do research, you have to make arrangements in advance. You just can't show up at the door. So that's where that is. The last thing I have to cover with you is the election results. Henry Freeman emailed me those. We had 173 ballots. One of them wasn't valid. We have 172 results. Here are the results. Greg Smith, president, 172 votes. Grant Berry, elected vice president, 172 votes. Chris Winslow, elected treasurer with 171 votes. Alan Young, elected secretary for 172 votes. Bruce Elliott, elected as director at large with 172 votes. And Nick Fry, elected as director at large for 170 votes. So that's the election results. We appreciate everybody's service. I'd like to make Henry Freeman stepping down as vice president. No, he's director. He was vice president. Henry contributed a number of years with the society as a leader, and I wish him the best. Wish him very much success with his building of his B&OCT railroad. And we'll see in the future how Henry's going to make contributions. We won't lose Henry because he's a great presenter. He comes out to most of the conventions and mini-cons and gives his expertise on research and modeling. So at this time, I will take any questions that anybody should have.
If you all want to unmute your microphone, if you have a question, go ahead.
I put one on the chat.
I have a question. Patty Smith from Perkins Township, Ohio. I've been working on a project with the B&O Museum on women from the B&O. And it's something that we had planned on doing this last summer, and now it's been postponed, of course, because of COVID. I'd like to come in and do some research. And who would I contact and what number?
Just email me at President B&ORRHS, and the webmaster will forward to me, and then I'll get in touch with you. You know, I'll make arrangements on certain days to be here just for you and not a crowd. We get more done without the crowd here, I'll tell you that right now.
Absolutely. Okay, yeah, because we've been putting together pictures of women on the B&O. Actually, it will be expanded to other railroads, but it's still in the development stages. It'd be like a convention type for the ladies.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yep. Anybody else?
There's nope, I don't see anything, Greg. I was looking at the
What was
chat.
Travers? Travers said he said something on the chat.
Greg, is it possible for you to take the camera that you have there and show around the room so that people can see where we're working and what we're doing and what the facility that the society has that is really a great facility for doing the kinds of things that we're doing?
Good
I don't know if
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. I am sitting in the workroom right now. In this workroom, we have a number of computer stations. That's the front south end of the building. As you can see, we have a copier, a workstation there. Over on the far side, there's a couple more computer stations. We have a couple laptops that the boys take to either the vault room or downstairs in the records room. We have a workstation in the center of the building right here. And we just put in this electric pole so that anybody comes here, they can plug their laptop or whatever else they're using without having cords across the center of the floor. There's another workstation there. And then right here, there's on this east end of the wall of this room, there's a large flatbed scanner. We have a number of scanners here. We have a slide scanner. And there's some more computer stations over here. So as Trevor pointed out, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Then we have a large scanner that's in the other room that will take up to 48-inch wide drawings, posters, whatever else, and we can digitize that. And our library is continued to get donations that fill up. We just have more than just B&O books. We have a lot of books. We have a lot of government reference materials. We have stock books and stock reports from the Washington Terminal. We have from Staten Island, various other things. And of course, we had the Ralph Barger Pullman collection that he's developed over the years. A lot of railroad information in there also. So, and then we also have all his research that he did on B&O cars, which part of what Joe's using to do the dining car book.
And you got Ray's book collection also, Ray Liptig's book collection.
Okay.
Greg, this is Al. Do you still have that large collection that you were holding? What was it, the Rodney Peterson collection or whatever?
We kept the B&O stuff, and everything else went to the Baltimore chapter of the National Railway Historical Society.
Is there a lot of B&O material in there?
There's probably 200 to 300 prints and about just under 900 color slides.
That's pretty sizable. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Wow. Okay. Any changes in the basement?
Not many. The two gentlemen that are working down there are doing a great job of organizing cataloging, and they're going to have a good finding aid, so now we can start looking and finding stuff. They're finding stuff that was misfiled and putting it in the right place. So that's moving along pretty well. I mean, of course, all the AFEs and the financial reports haven't even been touched.
Right.
And that's something most people don't want to deal with.
Right. I get it. Okay.
Any other questions?
If everybody put in $10, you'd have the mortgage paid off.
It's not much. I'll tell you that right now. It's not much.
In fact, wouldn't be 1,100 members. We'd only need about 750. All right.
Well, the numbers that Chris had does not include the donations that came in this week.
Okay.
And according to Craig, we got quite a few. Not some of them were like $3 or $4, but $3 or $4, and others were a couple $100. So all counts right now.
Fantastic.
I mean, most of the building maintenance, as Grant pointed out at the board meeting last night, our boiler was serviced last fall. The gentleman's coming in this week to do the pre-check before you fire up the boiler. He says our boiler is in such good shape, we got at least another 15 years out of it.
Fantastic.
Okay, we have a new roof that when we put it on, it had a 25-year warranty. Nobody has been on the roof since the roofers walked off. So and that's my intention, is nobody to go up on the roof. The only thing we got these in-wall air conditioner units as they go. We've already found out from the company that they have a new, modern, more efficient air conditioner that can go right in the same spot in the wall, and we don't have to do any maintenance, fabrication. So, but they're not cheap.
What are they?
We're going to replace those as they go bad.
How much are they each?
I don't remember, Al. That was I got the price quote about 18 months ago. I had to look that up.
Okay.
It's not like your normal window air conditioner, unfortunately.
I get that, yeah. Red
Uh,
has a question. He says, does the building have sprinklers or other fire protection and other security?
we have smoke and fire sensors. We have CO2 CO2 fire extinguishers through every room. This building is built with block walls, so if you have smoke or fire in one section, that it prohibits it from spreading. The problem is if you got sprinkler systems, the water will do more damage than the smoke.
Right.
And with historical documents, we're trying to keep all the documents enclosed as much as possible. The only exception is the drawing room because of the drawings, the way we have them set up. We're putting stuff in the file cabinets where we got file cabinets. At least if something falls down or gets in it, it cuts down on the damage to them. If the building really catches on fire, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Yeah, there's a big issue in this state because a number of counties are insisting that they put sprinkler systems throughout homes, and the insurance companies are screaming because of the cost, because when the sprinkler system goes off, everything gets damaged, and then the cost escalates. So I don't know where it's going to go. Because of the age of this building, the occupancy of the rooms, even the auditorium, we don't have to meet the county's requirement for sprinkler system.
Good.
And I'm not going to put a halon system in, that's for sure.
Well,
Any other questions?
how about water detectors?
One of the reasons why we got this building at such a good price is the basement flooded out. So when we put in the new alarm system, one of the things is we have water detectors in the basement.
There you go.
So, and all that information, humidity, climate control, water detectors, smoke and fire detectors, all are fed into Chris Winslow's computer. And when something goes off, or the alarm company calls up and says, hey, sensor so-and-so, and we had one of the water detectors go off on us and we had to have it replaced. I'd rather have a false alarm than that be flooded out.
Great. No other questions right now.
Our next project in the maintenance after we probably pay off the mortgage is to have the driveway resealed and repainted, because it's showing some numerous cracks and we got to take care of those. If we don't, it's going to get worse.
Okay. How about the CPL signal? Any plans to put that up?
If I can find somebody to transport a mast over here, and then have somebody dig the hole and anchor it down somehow. Yes, for the members that don't know, John King of Boyd's, Maryland, donated a complete CPL mast with all the aspect lights. And we got the target, we got all the aspect lights, we got the brackets, everything else, but we don't have a pole, and we would have to have it mounted. And then we have to, when we get the pole, we have to put something over the steps so people don't climb up on top of it.
Do you need a specific pole, a CPL pole, or can
you can use a regular steel pole, but I would like to have a CPL pole. I know where one is. It's just the guy who has it, when he transported it to his property, his backhoe is now broken and he's lost his trailer to transport it. So I need some way of, one, getting it over here, and two, some way of lifting it up once we had the footer in.
How long is it?
railroad used a series of concrete rings, and they ran a J-bolt all the way up through it, and then filled up the center and around those rings with gravel.
Hmm.
And that's how they mounted it.
But
So
was it like 20 or 30 feet long?
the pole is the normal height on normal conditions. The signal sets the bottom of the signal sets 14 feet. I think the poles are about 22, 24 feet,
Okay.
but they're telescoping steel ring pipes. So you have one slipping into another, and it's another. They're heavy. They're extremely heavy. They got 1-inch steel base on the bottom. You have a steel walkway up top where the signal maintainer can stand on, and it's got a steel safety rail around it. So they're unique signal masts.
Huh.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, folks. Hope we have another successful year. And next year, I hope we see each other in person.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Goodbye.
All right.
Yeah, Al, that should wrap it up, shouldn't it? Unless somebody else has a comment.
I think so. I mean, yeah. There's nothing else on the,
Nothing on the agenda.
nothing on the agenda. No, I think everything's done. I think everything was real good. The presentations were excellent. Had some good questions. If there's anything else, anybody can send us an email. If you have any other follow-up questions to any of the presenters, we can go from there.
Okay.
All right.
Is Nick still on?
Yep, still here.
Okay. Well, anyway, thanks to Nick and Al for all you've done to make this work. And I guess at this point, Nick, you can exit the Zoom presentation. Have the whole group exit.
All right. Thank you. And Andy, thank you very much for all your hard work. And Al, thank you so much for all of your hard work. And I'd love to be in Akron next year.
So we'll work on it.
Yep. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Okay.
Thank all of you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.